Hi there, everyone. Yay, it's Tuesday night. It's winning, and I'm just looking at myself in the picture with a big woolly jacket on. And I think winter has finally hit. Hope that you've had a really, really great week, and that I'm sure you've pulled out your winter clothes and your winter bedding in time for winter that's definitely here. Um, I'm just really excited about tonight. I'm always excited on a Tuesday night, but really looking forward to winning with you tonight. We're looking at the topic of leave the room, winning keys to living a winning lifestyle. And as always, just setting the groundwork for why I do winning is we all want to win, but winning isn't something that comes by accident. We win in life when we live life intentionally. And so winning is all about giving keys towards living a winning life. Hey Trace, good to see you, and anyone else who's jumped on. And so winning is a very practical, it's encouraging, it's challenging, but the bottom line is it's all about lifting lives, because if your life has been lifted, you're able to pass it on, you're able to pay it forward and lift someone else's life. So the next 20, 25 minutes, this is your time. So as I always say, just put down stuff in your mind, stuff that you've done. Hey Zan, good to see you. Good to see you, Linda. Stuff that maybe you've got to do, stuff that you've done, stuff that you haven't done. Just put it down, lean in, and really just absorb what the Lord wants to lay on your heart tonight. I had a really awesome weekend. My mom visited. As you know, my dad passed away on the 12th of April. And so it was really good to have my mom just come and spend the weekend with us, and we had some family time and just sort of looking at the power of relationships. You know, when you go through difficult times, and even when you're going through great times, those times can only be embraced when you're doing it within the framework of family. Relationships are so important. And, you know, if I look at the relationship I have with my mom, she's a best friend. And so we're able to journey through this part of our lives as a team. And it's great. So, you know, relationships in your life, make sure that you are attending to them. Don't neglect relationships that count, because the more effort we put into relationships, the more fruitful they are. And sometimes with the busyness of life, it's easy to neglect friendships. But pay attention, give nurturing, and build relationships, because at the end of all of it, it's the strength of relationships that we reflect on. So that's a little, just a bit of an extra additional over and above what we're going to be looking at tonight. Good to see Ronica, you've jumped on, good to see you. And so lean in, be ready to grab at least one thing that you're able to apply in your life. Thanks, Linda. It was good seeing my mom at the breakfast, because you want to leave here with a takeaway. You don't want to leave with nothing. And remember, if you hear something, it may not be relevant for you, but it may be relevant for someone else. So remember, it's all about paying it forward. So please, during the session, send those emojis if something really like clicks with you and it's like, aha, that's for me. Share this with someone who you really feel needs it. And yeah, just really open your hearts and just let God land whatever He wants to land in your heart tonight. So let's get started. So leave the room. So if you think of your home, there's certain rooms that you associate with certain functions. It's obvious, like the kitchen is where you cook, and for those of you who have maybe a breakfast table or some kind of a breakfast nook in the kitchen, it's also a place where you hang out and where you connect with family. And I'm going to be sort of making reference to when we all lived in lockdown. I don't know if you can go back to that time. Maybe you don't want to go back to that time, but maybe just sort of wind your memory back into when we were living in lockdown, particularly when we were living in level 5, where it was hard lockdown, no going out. And remember what it was like being confined to your home. And those of you who were unfortunate enough to contract the virus, you would have been locked into a room for a period of time. And so when I look back at that time, it was hard because it was very restrictive. So yes, each room had its own function, but in COVID, rooms changed their function. I mean, our lounge area became a recording studio. Because that's where we did church. We recorded church in our lounge dining room. My office at home became a place where I did all of my online devotionals, all of my counseling online. So that became a real workspace, but it also became a space where I was able to, it was kind of like a center, and I was able to reach so many people by just functioning in a room. But imagine if we remained in lockdown. I know for some people it was difficult coming out of lockdown. People were apprehensive about going back into public spaces. But the bottom line, if we look back on lockdown, we've come out of those spaces. We've left the rooms that we were confined in. Imagine if we didn't. Our growth and development would be severely stunted. And so tonight I want to look at how we need to leave rooms in our thinking. We can't be locked into one space for an extended amount of time without moving. But also in that it's, when we compare our thinking to different rooms in a house, different rooms in a home, I think if we remain locked in, our thinking can become quite destructive. If you don't have any human input, if there's no outlet, if you're kind of on your own for hours and hours, sometimes you might find that quite refreshing if you need a bit of a break from life. But generally speaking, we need to be in contact with people. If we're locked into our thinking and there's no outlet, if we're locked into a space, sometimes we can over-magnify things that are maybe quite trivial. We can sometimes become very negative. Our thinking can become quite destructive. And often we are our own hardest critics when we think about ourselves. So we need human input. We need the ability to be able to share with others. We need the ability to be able to debrief with others. So we need to leave the room of our physical homes, but we also need to leave the spaces in our thinking. We can't remain locked into our thinking because it can become incredibly destructive. Circle back to what I started tonight with. We were designed to be in relationship. Part of relationship is where we learn to trust God and others and come out of the isolated rooms of our thinking to share our thoughts, to get different perspectives, to be able to see things from another person's point of view, to maybe have our worldviews challenged, to have thought inaccuracies put back on the path of what is truth. So sometimes we need to move our thoughts from the rooms in our mind to a more open space where we allow others access in. Thoughts are incredibly influential because what you think determines what you speak, which has an influence on what you do. So if our thoughts are locked into isolation, it can definitely impede our communication and can inhibit our functioning. So how do we move our thoughts from being locked into an isolated room to where we get a different perspective, to where we are more transparent, to where we are more open and more trusting? I think one of the things is, if you think logically, if you want to get from one room into another, you have to open the door and walk through the doorway. So sometimes we need to open the door to certain rooms in our mind in terms of our thinking, and actually let go of things like bitterness, resentment, unforgiveness. Only we can hold on to those thoughts. Only we can open the door to allow the influence of others, including the Lord, to come into that space and to help us unpack, process, and actually be set free from thoughts that are very limiting and inhibiting. But it literally takes where we open that door and it's like, I'm ready now to release whatever it is, as I said, unforgiveness, bitterness, resentment, and to actually move forward in life. Because remember, what you think determines what you say, inhibits what you do. And there are so many people who, for example, lack the freedom to be in authentic relationships because the door in the room that contains unforgiveness is shut tight and it's not allowing any access. And so that emotion, that feeling actually has a very controlling hold on the individual. A second way is we can actually out with the old, in with the new. So it's kind of like an exchange process. Sometimes our perspectives and our thinking is stuck somewhere where we aren't physically. Let me explain that a little bit. Sometimes we are still holding on to, for example, a Sunday school level of understanding of theology. Now, I doubt if any of you are Sunday school age. So your thinking is stuck in a childhood phase of your life where you physically are no longer. And so sometimes our thinking actually needs to mature and develop and catch up with where we are physically. So to put it bluntly, childish thinking needs to leave the room in our thinking. And how do we do that? Well, it's introduce a higher level of understanding, whether it be in theology, for example, whether it be even in emotional intelligence. You know, some of us develop our lives cognitively. We go to tertiary education, we do courses, we maybe develop ourselves physically. We run, we walk, we go to the gym. But sometimes we don't actually develop our emotional capacity. Our emotional intelligence can be quite stunted. And how do we develop that? Well, learn, find out more. What is your personality type? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Develop those. God's not going to develop those for you. But sometimes we get locked in our thinking and we need to actually leave the room of childish immaturity and step into aligning our thinking with where we are at physically. A third way, if you think about your home, if you've got too much furniture in one space, I mean, sometimes, and I'm not being discriminatory, but sometimes older people's homes, like Granny and Grandpa, can have ornaments in there from 30, 40, 50 years ago. And wherever you look, it's just ornaments. It's pictures on the walls, it's family pictures on the sideboard, it's furniture, it's bits and pieces of furniture from the lounge suites and dining room suites that they've inherited over the years. And it's impossible to fit anything new into the bric-a-brac of clutter. And so in our thinking, sometimes there's so much in there that there's no space for new thinking. There's no space for new perspectives. And so we need to declutter. And to do that, we need to kind of think about our thinking. What is in there that actually I've outgrown that? What's in your thinking where that's no longer a helpful thought for me? I've outgrown that. You know, maybe someone said something to you as a child and you're still holding on to that. It's done and dusted. Let it go. Open the door. Let that thought leave the room of your thinking to make space for new thinking. For example, when I was in grade 1, my ballet teacher said to me, he loves plump ballet dancers. And that put something on me. It's like, I'm fat. And so I left ballet and I developed such a complex about my body at the age of 6. I had to let that thought go. That was cluttering my thinking about my self-image. So I had to let that thought leave the room. I love this scripture in Romans 12 verse 2 in the NIV. Don't conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to attest and approve what God's good, perfect, and pleasing will is. We transform our mind. We are to transform it. We need to think about our thinking. We need to look at thoughts that need to leave the room. We need to look at thinking that is outdated and needs to go so that new, innovative, fresh thoughts can come in, fresh perspectives, fresh ideologies. And so it's a constant decluttering. It's a constant cleaning out. I mean, if you think about it, you would never not clean your home for years. I mean, hoarders don't clean their home for years, but if you look at the life of a hoarder, it's extremely destructive, unhealthy, and not conducive for any kind of growth. It's the same with our mind. We need to clean our minds regularly. We need to go into the rooms in our thinking. What doesn't belong? What's outdated? What needs to be exchanged for something else? That's our responsibility. God's not going to do that for us, because as healthy as our mind is as healthy as our speech is as healthy as our lifestyle is. So you can see a distinct domino effect. And so if you look at, let's take the whole house analogy a step further. Certain rooms in our homes have certain functions. So for example, the lounge is where your guests go. If you know your guests very well, you might invite them into the kitchen and they can chat to you while you're prepping the meal that you've invited them for. But you would definitely not entertain guests in your bathroom. So we have a say over where we want our guests to be. Sometimes you do get cheeky guests and just kind of help themselves to a self-tour. But generally, you have a say over who crosses the threshold into your home. You have a say about which room the guests are actually going to hang out in. So just as we have a say over which rooms we want our guests to be in, we also have a say over which thoughts we allow to come in the first place. So for example, some principles around our thinking. Some thoughts should never be allowed even to cross the front door of our mind regarding the rooms in our mind thinking. And those would be thoughts that are contrary to the Word of God. You know, thoughts like, you're a failure, you're never going to amount to much, this is your lot in life, this is how it's always been, this is how it's always going to be. Those thoughts we don't even allow across the threshold at the front door. It's like, I'm opening the door, I see you, but I'm not going to invite you in, I'm not going to entertain you. And if you don't want someone at your door, you just close the door. Or alternatively, you don't open the security door. In fact, if you look at the way we live now, people don't even get to our door. They get to the gate or they get to the intercom system. So if you're not happy with someone who's trying to get access into your home, you don't let them in. We need to do the same with our thinking. Don't let certain thoughts even cross the threshold of your mind. I think sometimes we need to allow certain thoughts that need time to be processed and to analyze and to think through and to spend a lot of time with those thoughts. And that's okay. You know, sometimes if you're making a decision, a big decision, those thoughts need to be analyzed and unpacked and look at the pros and look at the cons. But then there are certain things where we devote too much attention to something that has minimal importance in our lives. So, for example, someone may hurt you. Maybe they say something offensive. Sure, give it some thought. But don't allow it into the same room that you use for things of huge importance, like a job change or a country change. You know, that's a room reserved for things that need deep, reflective, insightful thinking. Sometimes we allow trivial things into that space. Sometimes we allow trivial things way too much thinking, way too much thought energy. We need to be very discerning in how much significance we place on things in our lives and how much thought energy we give them. The enemy loves to distract us and loves to get us to spend way too much time focusing on things that at the end of the day are actually quite trivial. So someone cut you off on the way to work. That doesn't require hours and hours of analytical thinking. It's like that person cut me off, I felt annoyed, I'm over it, move on. I think sometimes in terms of our thinking, we need to learn to, once we've given it deep thought and we've analyzed it and we've come to a solution, then show that thought out the door. I've finished with that. Don't keep reliving things that have happened years ago. It's like think through it, deal with it with the Lord, come up with a solution, move it out, and move on to the next thing. We can't hoard things that have happened to us years and years and years ago. If you are, maybe you need to get some counseling to help you release that thought so that you're able to move forward and move on with your life. So let's kind of do a quick summary as we land tonight. We've looked at our thinking influences speech and action. We've looked at what we allow regarding thinking to come into our space. We've looked at thoughts that are already in there. We need to look at the thoughts that are already in there. Are some of them still immature and need to grow up to where we are physically? Are some of them a handicap and we actually need to deal with those and show them the door? Then we've looked at thought access into our lives and be discerning. What do we allow regarding thoughts crossing the threshold of our mind? Do we give some things way too much cognitive and thought airtime than what is warranted? But summing it all up, think about your thinking and what needs to be shown the way out. What needs to, and I'm going to end on the kind of thing we need to invite into our thinking. And I think that's a beautiful way to close tonight. So listen to this, Philippians 4:8-9 in the Message. Summing it all up, my friends, this is what you need to fill your minds with. Meditate on things that are true, noble, reputable, authentic, compelling, and gracious. Think on the best, not the worst, the beautiful, not the ugly, things to praise, not things to curse. Put into practice what you've learned from me, what you heard, and what you saw, and what you realized. Do that, and God, who makes everything work together, will work you into his most excellent harmonies. When all is said and done and you're in your own zone, what's your thinking? Is the theme of your thinking negative? Is the theme of your thinking hope-filled? Analyze your thinking, and maybe you need to show some thoughts the door. Out. Maybe you need to show some thoughts the door. In. I pray that you've been encouraged tonight to think about your thinking and to be a good steward. Think about those rooms in your mind. Have a good clean out. Have a good sort out. Can't wait to see you next week. God bless every one of you. Take care. Have an awesome week. Bye, everyone.